Ice stretched endlessly across the horizon. The wind howled through snow-covered ravines, and stray flakes drifted aimlessly into the eternal night. Somewhere in that desolate expanse, where life seemed all but extinguished, a small flame flickered in a dark cave. Around it, shadowy figures huddled close, their eyes reflecting the glow of the embers. They trembled, yet remained resolute, for behind them was an entire bloodline waiting for survival. Fragile children, curled within thick hides, breathing in thin, fragile gasps against the biting cold. The world, then, was no place for weakness. Early humans faced colossal beasts, unending winters, and hunger gnawing at them as the earth lay imprisoned beneath ice. Yet it was within this very harshness that the first fragments of human memory were forged. Every crackle of burning wood was like a heartbeat of humanity, keeping the light alive, keeping hope from vanishing. A mother clutched her child tightly, humming a tune no one could tell was a lullaby or simply a weary sigh. The child closed its eyes, surrendering to the mingling of firelight and darkness, letting the storm outside become a distant lull. They were the children of ice, born in the harshest of ages, yet a testament to boundless resilience. And their story, their struggle to endure through the first ice age, is the story of how humankind rose from darkness to light, from fragility to eternity. The Earth was shifting into one of the harshest phases in its history. Around 2 million years ago, the global climate entered a cycle of recurring freezes, marking the beginning of what would later be called the Ice Age. Heavy gray clouds blanketed the sky, and the sun's weak rays struggled to pierce the gloom. The cold seeped into every stone, every grain of soil, making the entire world tremble under the endless howling winds. For early humans, those who had only just begun to step out of the wilderness, this was an unimaginable trial, one where their very survival depended on their ability to adapt. In Africa, the cradle of humanity, lush grasslands gradually transformed. The earth dried, rains became scarce, and herds of animals migrated farther in search of food. In Europe and Asia, colossal glaciers advanced from the north, swallowing vast lands that today are forests and plains. Trees stopped growing, fields withered, and the ground hardened beneath layers of ice. The earth had become a realm of cruelty, a vast and frigid prison. Small human groups, living by foraging and hunting, faced daily threats of extinction. Their bodies were ill-prepared for the cold. Their tools were nothing more than chipped stones, and fire, the only light that could defy the darkness, was still unfamiliar, fragile, and hard to sustain. Yet, it was within this hardship that humanity began its first steps on the great journey. Each footprint in the snow, a testament to their unyielding will. The endless winter nights were a terror. When the sun set, the world was swallowed in thick darkness, and the cold sank deep enough to make bones feel frozen solid. Winds roared through mountain passes and across snowy plains, weaving an eternal dirge. Early humans curled into thin hides, eyes wide in the darkness, praying for dawn. But even daylight brought little warmth. The sun, nothing more than a pale disk hanging in a dim sky. Amid this harshness, they learned to take shelter in natural caves. These shelters did more than shield them from wind and snow. They became humanity's first homes. Within the dark stone walls, early families clustered together, sharing scraps of meat from the hunt, passing around a handful of roots and berries. Children pressed against their mothers' chests, breathing faintly, while adults took turns keeping watch, listening to wolves howl across the frozen plains. Fragile as they were not entirely powerless. Hands that chipped stone learned to shape cutting edges, helping them carve meat from carcasses more quickly, strip hides for warmth, and use bones to frame makeshift shelters. These crude tools were their only weapons against nature, proof that the human mind had begun to awaken. The cold forced them to invent, and within that pressure, their first skills took form. The severity of the age also drove long migrations. When the old land was depleted, groups were compelled to move, crossing vast ice fields, fording frozen rivers, searching for regions with more game and wild plants. These journeys were gambles of survival, often putting them face to face with colossal beasts, from woolly mammoths to saber-toothed cats with dagger-like fangs. A single misstep, a cracked patch of ice, a failed hunt could mean death for the entire group. Yet they pressed forward, for to stay put was to perish. In the midst of the bitter cold, light became the emblem of hope. For the first time, they learned to preserve embers from wildfires. That spark was carefully guarded in bark or stone hollows, cherished as a treasure. Around it, darkness receded, frost loosened its grip, and humans could breathe within its warmth. Trembling hands stretched toward the flames, wide eyes reflecting the glow, as if witnessing a miracle. From then on, fire became their silent guardian, an indispensable companion. The frozen world was not only suffering, it was also a teacher. Harshness taught humans to draw closer. In sharing scarce food, they discovered connection. In braving snowstorms together, they learned the power of unity. When one fell, they knew to lift each other up. This was the first moment humankind realized survival depended on solidarity. The Ice Age was more than a climatic shift. It was a crucible, forging the essence of humanity. From trembling in the dark, they learned to stand and move forward. From gnawing hunger, they learned to store and share. From the fear of snow and wind, they learned to trust in the small, steady glow of fire. Every step, every chipped stone, every heartbeat was proof that they would not bow to the ice. And when dawn broke after another endless night, faint sunlight glinting on the frozen land, early humans stood there, small, fragile, yet unbroken. Before them lay a world of cold and hardship, but within them burned something stronger than the fiercest storm. The will to survive, the hunger to endure, and the unrelenting desire to write the story of humankind. The ice kept spreading, rivers turning into opaque white masses, drifting silently like slumbering beasts. Across the barren plains, winds carried swirling snow that buried the traces of migrating groups. There was no certain path forward, only patience and instinct to guide them. At times, they paused in mountain crevices where the wind was weaker and water seeped from hidden springs, then moved on again when hunger drove them into new journeys. Each primitive portrait of humankind painted a small, fragile, yet courageous cycle of life upon the vast canvas of the Ice Age. In the darkness of caves, wordless stories began to appear. Adults used their hands to mark the walls, not out of artistic intent, but out of a yearning to leave a trace. They carved shapes of predators, arms raised with stone spears, circles symbolizing the sun and the moon. It was their way of remembering, a message to future generations that people had once lived, fought, and endured amid the ice. Perhaps it was in these moments that the very notion of memory and history first came into being. Children raised in that unforgiving world knew nothing of the warmth we take for granted. For them, Cold was reality, blizzards were lullabies, and flickering firelight was the sign of life itself. They learned to follow animal tracks in the snow, to distinguish the howl of wolves from the roar of the wind, and to keep silent when the shadow of a saber-toothed cat slipped through the trees. Innocence faded quickly, replaced by the early awakening of survival instincts in their young eyes. And it was these children, raised in ice, who became the first true generation to fight hardship with both body and mind. On the hunt, tension was ever present. A small band surrounded a massive beast, shouting to drive it into a corner. Spears of wood and stone could snap at any moment, and a single charge from a mammoth could scatter them in an instant. Yet with each success, they learned something new: how to divide the meat without waste, how to preserve it by burying it beneath the ice, how to use every part of the animal, from bone to hide. Hunting was more than survival. It was a lesson in intelligence and community, two forces that would become the foundation of human evolution. As winter followed winter, people began to understand that survival depended not just on muscle, but on creativity. They learned to bind stone to the ends of shafts to make sturdier weapons, to sharpen animal bones into spear tips, to stitch hides into windbreaks. These small innovations, little by little, opened an entirely new path, one where humans no longer remained passive before nature, but began shaping it to their needs. Still, not all were saved. Many groups vanished into history's darkness, starving on frozen plains, freezing in storm-filled nights, or falling to the claws of predators. Their remains were but scattered bones in caves, faint ashes left in buried hearths. Yet even their disappearance was part of the story, a reminder that humanity's existence was never guaranteed, but a fragile victory won through countless brushes with extinction. And still, amid the loss, hope never died. Once fire was preserved, it became the heart of the community. Around its glow, they felt safety, felt darkness retreat. The elders spoke in broken sounds and gestures, telling tales of hunts, of distant journeys, of colossal beasts they had seen. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining the world beyond, where ice reigned yet life persisted. These spoken tales, simple as they were, became the seeds of imagination, of language, and of culture. The Ice Age, with all its cruelty, left humanity no retreat. It forced them to seek, to invent, to connect. Scattered bands and isolated individuals learned to become a community. And that community, small as it was, became the foundation of all human history to come. Without the depths of that cold, perhaps mankind would never have discovered the value of fire, of unity, and of faith in tomorrow. When the sun rose after a long night, its faint gold light shone across the thick ice, scattering into thousands of glittering rays like blades of crystal. Humankind still stood there, trembling, but proud, knowing that many winters lay ahead, yet also knowing they had taken their first steps. And those footprints, pressed deep into the snow, were the declaration that humanity would not perish, that within their frail hearts burned a hidden fire, one that would never yield to the darkness. As ice continued to spread across the continents, life seemed to retreat into narrow pockets where early humans clung on to survive. From Africa to Europe, sparse groups trudged through snowstorms. Each step they took leaving an imprint on history. Their journeys were no longer just about finding food. They had become fateful migrations, where every small band of people was both witness and victim of a merciless age. The first inhabitants of the Ice Age were Homo habilis, the skillful hands that learned to chip stone into tools. From a lifeless rock, they shaped cutting edges and pounding tools, simple implements that nonetheless became the keys to survival. Out on the frozen plains, they moved in groups, eyes fixed on roaming herds, ears tuned to every subtle sound. Each tool was more than an object. It was an extension of the body, proof that humankind had begun to turn nature into an ally. After Homo habilis, taller figures began to emerge. Homo erectus, with stronger builds and upright strides, stepped out of the caves and further into the world. They not only chipped stone, but mastered fire, a monumental breakthrough in human history. With fire, they could drive away predators, stay warm through endless nights, and, most importantly, cook their food. A piece of roasted meat was easier to eat, yielded more energy, and fueled the growth of their brains. In the glow of firelight, humankind saw for the first time that they were not entirely powerless before nature. These early dwellers did not live alone. They formed small groups, often just a few dozen, hunting and sharing together. Each band was like an extended family, bound by the struggle against the cold, sharing sips of water and scraps of food. They moved with the seasons, following migrating herds, settling near sturdy caves, and leaving again when winter pressed too hard. Within that uncertainty, they learned to lean on one another, and from that need, the first sense of community began to form, however instinctive it was. Out on the vast ice fields, humans were not the only hunters. Packs of starving wolves stalked the weak, saber-toothed cats prowled in the shadows, and massive beasts could be both sustenance and deadly threat. A mammoth hunt, if successful, could feed a group for weeks, yet in a single instant could also claim the lives of several hunters. They knew the risks, but hunger left no other choice. Each step circling the giant beast, each shout, each thrown spear was a wager with fate. And in those perilous moments, cooperation and trust in one another were forged most powerfully. The first inhabitants also began to see the world with new eyes. They noticed the signs of winter in the wind, the shifting phases of the moon, and began to sense a rhythm repeating itself. Vague ideas of time, of nature's cycles, may have taken root in their minds. Sitting around the fire, they communicated with gestures, sounds, and guttural cries, the beginnings of language. It was not words or sentences, but grunts, claps, and emphasized sounds. Yet what mattered was that they had begun to speak, to share not only fear, but also hope. Each night, the group gathered, fire blazing in the dark cave. Adults sat close, listening to the wind howl outside, while children slept in their parents' arms. Those children were living proof of survival, the next generation who would learn to chip stone, to keep the fire, to flee from predators. They were small, but they were the most important inhabitants of all, for in their eyes, humankind saw its own continuation. The ice age gave birth not only to cold, but to a survival instinct stronger than ever before. The first inhabitants learned that true strength did not lie in muscle, but in unity, in creativity, and in hope. Each stone tool, each fire preserved, each child growing up in the storm was testimony to this resilience, and it was from them, the first dwellers of the Ice Age, that humankind laid the foundations to walk further, pressing forward on its long journey through history. In the endless cold, the earliest inhabitants of the Ice Age gradually shaped a rhythm of life, one woven from hardship and the instinct to survive. Their days began not with the warmth of the sun, but with clouds of white breath as they stepped from caves, feet sinking into deep snow, eyes scanning for signs of life. Tracks in the snow were guides, distant cries were warnings, and the flight of migrating birds signaled hidden sources of food. Humans learned to read the silent language of nature, for it was the only map that could lead them forward through the frozen world. On their long journeys, early humans carried sharp stones, crude spears bound with animal sinew, and a few thick hides to shield against the wind. They traveled light, taking only what was essential, for their strength could not bear excess weight. Every step was a challenge, but patience was their greatest weapon. Along the way, they dug roots from frozen soil, foraged for hardy tubers, and plucked the rare, shriveled fruit still clinging to branches. Piece by piece, they gathered meager meals, just enough to keep breathing, enough to last another day. When fortune struck, a successful hunt brought fleeting joy. A fallen deer, a trapped wild boar. These became treasures of life itself. Stone tools carved meat, bones turned into implements, hides into shelter. Nothing was wasted. For they knew nature was never generous, and waste could mean death. That night, around the crackling fire, they shared roasted meat, smoke curling into the dark cave like a simple but sacred ritual. Children laughed with full bellies, while adults exchanged quiet nods, knowing they had bought themselves another day. But luck was never certain. There were days of walking miles without sighting a single beast, hunger gnawing at their strength. There were nights when blizzards raged, skies vanishing in white fury, winds tearing at the stone shelters. In those moments, fire became priceless, not only for warmth, but for faith. Each spark that snapped in the flames was a reminder that hope remained, that neither darkness nor cold could swallow humanity whole. In survival, deeper bonds began to form. Life was no longer just gathering for food, but building a small community where everyone had a role. The strong hunted, the skilled chipped tools, the elders tended fire and guided children. The young, though fragile, quickly learned to watch, to distinguish the voice of the wind from the howl of predators, to recognize danger's signs. Lessons were not written, nor spoken in long explanations, but passed through action, through eyes, through endless repetition of lived experience. From this, the first threads of human culture were spun, primitive, yet as unyielding as the ice around them. They also began to realize their bond with animals was not only one of rivalry. Wolves were dangerous hunters, but sometimes they trailed humans for scraps. And humans, seeing a glimmer of loyalty in the eyes of wolf pups, began nurturing a fragile connection. The pups were fed, then slowly became companions, alerting the group to danger, lending strength in hunts. From that harsh ice age was born one of the longest-lasting relationships in human history. In the minds of early humans, the world was more than a place to survive. It was a mystery to be explained. They looked up at the round moon, silver light spilling over the frozen plains, and vague questions stirred within them. They could not name it, but they felt it was something greater than themselves, something that ruled the cycle of day and night, of cold and warmth. From this wonder, the seeds of belief and imagination were sown. Around fires, elders told stories with howls, growls, and gestures, of the moon, of the sun, of invisible spirits watching them. Crude though they were, these tales soothed fear and kept faith alive. As time passed, their footprints spread across continents. They did not remain in one land, but pressed ever forward. From Africa, they moved north, through the Middle East, across frozen grasslands, and into icy Europe. Every step was an experiment, a trial. Some groups vanished without a trace, but others endured, forming tiny communities that laid the groundwork for future generations. Their ceaseless migrations expanded humanity's survival map, transforming them from mere survivors into gradual conquerors. The first inhabitants of the Ice Age did not know they were writing history. For them, each day was only a struggle to live, each winter only another trial to overcome. Yet, from the perspective of posterity, they were the foundation of humanity, the ones who laid the first stones in a journey spanning millions of years. From chipped rock, from flickering fire, from the faint echoes in caves, a species began its ascent, a species destined to become Earth's dominion. And when the final dawn of a long winter broke, pale gold light spilling across frost-covered plains, those people looked to the horizon. They did not know what lay ahead, peril or sustenance, but in their eyes was something that never faded, the determination to keep moving forward. And it was that step, carried through countless generations, that led humanity from the cold caves of the Ice Age to the vast civilizations we know today. In the dense blackness of Ice Age nights, as winds howled through mountain passes and the sky vanished into shadow, early humans discovered their greatest companion, fire. No one knows the exact moment it happened. Perhaps a small band stumbled upon embers left smoldering after a forest blaze. At first, they trembled before the crimson glow and searing heat, fearful of its strange power. But slowly, they realized that within fire lay a force unlike any other, a force that could melt the frozen air and drive away the darkness that had always loomed over them. Fire became the heart of every gathering. In caves, the old and the young, men and women, all sat in a circle around the flames, light flickering in their wide, shining eyes. Its warmth melted thin sheets of ice from stone walls, easing the stiffness in trembling hands. For the first time in history, humans felt they could resist nature, that they were not entirely helpless against the cold. Fire was a promise that they could go on living, travel further, endure the endless winters. Yet fire was not easily kept. A strong gust could snuff it out, a snowstorm could bury it, and so they guarded it like a sacred treasure. Wood was saved and dried, stored deep inside caves. On migrations, they carried glowing embers wrapped in bark or nestled in ash, ready to be rekindled at any moment. The firekeeper was the most important of all, for if the flame died, the group could fall into a frozen death. In every glance and every gesture, there was both worry and faith invested in the survival of the fire. From fire, humans learned new things. They discovered that meat could be cooked, making it easier to chew and digest. They learned to soften hides in heat, to harden stone and create sharper tools. Fire turned food into rich energy, fueling brain growth, strengthening bodies. These changes did not happen overnight, but little by little, fire etched itself into human blood, transforming them from fragile creatures into beings capable of standing firm against nature. Around the fire, the first seeds of language grew clearer. In the flickering light, elders used howls, growls, and pounding fists on their chests to recount hunts. They mimicked animal calls, running strides, and the moment of the spear's throw. Others listened, learned, and remembered. Fire was not just warmth, it became the cradle of memory, the hearth of collective knowledge, the seedbed of early culture. There, people no longer lived only for themselves, but began to share, to pass things down to those who would come after. In the vast night, the fire was like a star fallen to earth. Beyond its glow stretched endless darkness, wolves crying from afar, winds howling like the voices of lost spirits. Yet within the circle of light, humans felt safe, protected. Children slept in their mother's arms, lulled by the crackle of flames. Adults let their weary shoulders relax, granting themselves a rare moment of peace. In this stark contrast between infinite darkness and fragile light, a new faith was born, that even when the outside world was filled with peril, there was still a place of safety to return to. But fire also taught them reverence. Carelessness could turn it into destruction, burning flesh, consuming caves, leaving only ruin. Each time flames roared too high, they felt both fear and awe. Gradually, a sense of the sacred took root. Fire was not only a friend, but a being to be respected, tended, even revered, as if it carried a spirit of its own. Perhaps here lay the first stirrings of belief, born from the sight of fire as a power beyond their understanding. Fire changed everything. It pulled humans out of total dependence on nature, gave them tools to fight the cold, gave them hope to withstand the dark. In its light, they began to dream of tomorrow, of journeys ahead, of lives no longer bound only by fleeing and fear. Fire was the turning point, the irreplaceable milestone in humanity's long journey. And so, through the endless nights of the Ice Age, amid eternal blizzards, humans found their own small sun. Not one that hung in the sky, but one held in their hands, burning in their hearts, lighting the path of survival without end. The long nights of the Ice Age left more than just the memory of fear. They imprinted on humanity the warmth of the fire circle. Around its flickering glow, people began forging bonds that reached beyond mere survival. Fire became the heart of the community, the place where everyone gathered after long, weary journeys, where spoils were shared, where hearts beat in unison. No longer just survival. Fire turned existence into communion, transforming scattered bands into groups that moved as one. In the firelight, children were taught how to hold a stone, how to sharpen its edge, how to place wood so the flame would not die. They learned by watching, by repeating, and by mistakes forgiven with patience. A child knocking over embers might frighten everyone, but it also became a lesson in respect. Generation after generation grew up around the flames, inheriting the knowledge that the survival of all depended on how well the fire was kept. The flames also awakened imagination. In the dancing light upon cave walls, early humans saw strange forms, perhaps the shape of predators, perhaps the faint faces of ancestors, perhaps spirits they felt lurking nearby. From this, the first oral tales were born, primitive legends of fire's mysterious power, of an unseen guardian ensuring the light never faded. Without writing, without full language, only with howls, growls, and gestures, these stories lived through countless frozen nights. For many generations, fire not only fed and warmed them, but reshaped their very way of life. Before fire, night was a time of silence and fear, when people huddled in darkness, shivering until dawn. With fire, night became a time of community. They gathered close, speaking in rough sounds, telling hunting stories, teaching children, planning the next day. Their lives were no longer bound solely to the sun's rise and fall, but stretched further by the first artificial light humanity had ever known. In its glow, deeper spiritual ties emerged. Elders, drawing on memory, told children of winters past, of dangers endured and overcome. These stories were not just recollections, but lessons, ways to prepare the young for perils to come. Crude as the words were, incomplete as the language was, the telling bound generations together. Fire was not only sustenance, but also memory and tradition. Its existence also reshaped humanity's relationship with darkness. Darkness no longer reigned absolute. It became the fragile boundary between firelight and the unknown beyond. Within the circle lay safety. Beyond it, wolves prowled, predators growled, shadows shifted in the night. This boundary sharpened their awareness of light's value. They knew that stepping beyond it meant returning to weakness, but within its glow, they felt part of a greater strength. Fire gradually came to be revered as if alive. They tended it like a child, feeding it wood, shielding it from the wind, never letting it fade. Likely, they began forming rudimentary rituals around it, clapping, howling, tossing ash into the air. These were expressions of respect, of gratitude for what had saved them from extinction. Out of this reverence may have sprung the first roots of belief, the earliest foundations of human spirituality. From a broader view, fire transformed humanity at its core. It gave warmth, light, food, tools, memory, faith, and above all, hope. Without it, humans would have remained trembling creatures in the dark. With it, they began to rise, to dream, to look beyond the horizon. Fire burned not only in caves, but within their hearts, a flame of will that never went out. And as winter followed winter, as beasts still howled in the distance, the flame endured. It stood as the sign that humans still lived, still endured. From one generation to the next, they passed down not only the skill of kindling fire, but also the conviction that its light would never be extinguished. In humanity's long journey, fire and darkness became twin symbols, and in that eternal struggle, humans chose the side of light, step by step escaping the night of nature. Across the snow-covered plains, as icy winds tore through the animal hides wrapped tightly around their bodies, early humans never walked alone. They were always aware that out there, in the vast lands of the Ice Age, colossal creatures roamed, both threats and sources of life. These were their unwilling companions, shaping the wild tableau of a world where humans were only a small part of the relentless cycle of survival. Foremost among them was the mammoth, towering giants draped in thick fur, with sweeping tusks curving outward like pale scythes. Their massive silhouettes loomed across the frozen horizon, moving slowly, but with immense presence. To early humans, mammoths meant an abundance of meat, hides for clothing, bones for shelter and tools. Yet bringing one down demanded blood and sacrifice. A single thrust of a tusk could hurl hunters into the air. A stomp could crush bones to dust. Every mammoth hunt was a desperate gamble, where humans relied on wit to compensate for fragile bodies, surrounding the beast, using fire, shouts, and volleys of spears, wearing it down until it collapsed. Equally terrifying was the saber-toothed cat, the legendary predator of the Ice Age. With dagger-like fangs, it could kill massive prey in a single bite. Its golden eyes flashed in the dark, sending chills through any who sensed its presence. For humans, saber-toothed cats were not just direct threats, but fierce rivals for food. Many times, they had to abandon fresh kills to the great cat, knowing the survival of the group mattered more than any feast. In ancestral memory, the silhouette of the saber-toothed cat surely became an emblem of dread, a supreme hunter that kept humanity ever vigilant. Not all beasts were predators. Herds of wild horses, swift and tireless, coursed across frozen steppes, leaving trails of snow in their wake. They were precious sources of food, Yet to bring one down from the great thundering herd was nearly impossible. The horses were fast, easily startled, and able to outpace humans across brutal terrain. Still, the chase itself became a teacher, training humans in patience, coordination, and the art of encirclement. On windswept hills, woolly rhinoceroses prowled, massive, aggressive, with horns like sharpened spears. These living mountains of muscle moved ponderously, but when provoked, charged with shocking speed, crushing anything in their path. Rarely did humans dare face them outright. Yet at times, storms or old wounds brought one down, and its carcass became a fortune, meat, hide, and bone in abundance, a rare gift from nature itself. And then there were the wolves, gray hunters with glinting eyes, thick coats, and howls that pierced the night. They roamed in packs, hunting with a skill and cooperation rivaling humans themselves. At first, they were relentless threats, shadowing human groups, ready to snatch scraps of meat. But over time, something shifted. Perhaps on long nights, humans encountered abandoned wolf pups, weak, hungry, and alone. Instead of killing them, they shared scraps of food, receiving wary but unhostile gazes in return. Slowly, nurtured wolves became companions, sounding warnings of danger, aiding in the hunt. From this fragile beginning grew one of history's longest bonds, what humans would one day call the dog. The tableau of Ice Age companions was both fierce and majestic. Among all creatures, humans were the weakest, yet they learned to stand firm within the cycle, refusing to be swept aside. They feared but did not flee, risked but also waited. They mastered timing, seized opportunities. Because of these colossal beasts, humans were forced to invent, to cooperate, to evolve, or vanish. And so, in a world of ice and storm, humanity found itself surrounded by reluctant companions. Predators, giants, herds, all became lessons, trials, and at times, blessings. Without them, perhaps humans would never have learned survival. But because of them, humankind discovered the value of cunning, of intelligence, and of the strength found only in unity. Through the long, endless journey of the Ice Age, early humans not only faced the colossal creatures of the frozen plains, but also learned to watch them, to imitate them, even to rely on them to survive. Every animal on the icy steppe was a living lesson, a book of knowledge written by nature itself, one that humans were compelled to read and remember line by line. The migrating herds of reindeer became guiding compasses. Following the reindeer meant following food, hides, and antlers for tools. Their seasonal journeys carried the rhythm of time itself, teaching humans that the world was not chaos, but cycles and repetition. With each migration, people left their caves and moved with the herds, as if their entire community had become tied to the heartbeat of nature. Farther north, enormous cave bears hibernated in rocky dens. Encountering one alive was an omen of death, yet sometimes the carcass of a starved bear became an unexpected feast. Humans regarded bears with a mixture of fear and awe, seeing them both as deadly foes and as symbols of raw power. Around flickering firelight, stories of bears were told and retold until they became more than animals. They became emblems of terror, strength, and perhaps even the first seeds of belief, where humans looked at beasts and saw the reflection of supernatural might. Predators did not always appear in the flesh. They left traces, sounds, and scents drifting on the wind, each a warning sign. Humans learned to read these signals as we now read written words. A long, drawn-out howl meant wolves nearby. A musky scent on the breeze foretold the passing of saber-toothed cats. Claw marks gouged into tree bark signaled that a bear had passed. Such perception was not instinct alone, but the fruit of patient observation and collective memory carried through generations. Gradually, humans looked upon animals not only with fear, but with the eyes of apprentices. They watched wolves hunt in packs, then copied their tactics of encirclement. They saw mammoths use tusks to sweep snow in search of grass and began digging through snow for roots. They noticed wild horses moving in herds and began grouping themselves into larger bands for protection. These unwilling companions of the Ice Age did not just push humans to the brink of life and death, they became their teachers in the art of adaptation. Perhaps from this deep connection arose the first cave paintings, crude yet powerful sketches of mammoths, wild horses, bison, bears, wolves. More than depictions, these were memory preserved, gratitude offered, or even prayers for protection. In these images lay a fusion of reality and myth, of fear and reverence. The frozen world, if inhabited by humans alone, would have been an empty place. But the presence of these companions turned it into a vast stage, each species playing its role in the grand symphony of survival. Humans, though the weakest, became the quickest learners, turning enemies into lessons, dangers into opportunities. Through this, they not only endured, but slowly evolved into masters of the land, and at night, as fire crackled against the dark, they listened. The howl of wolves, the roar of saber-toothed cats, the heavy footsteps of mammoths in the distance. Together, these sounds wove a mournful yet majestic music, reminding them they were never alone on this journey. Companions of the ice, whether foe or ally, shaped humanity, training their resilience and sharpening their minds. Through these encounters, humans learned that survival required not just strength, but skill, imagination, and the ability to see opportunity hidden within peril. Thus, in the all-encompassing cold, early humans and their companions wrote the opening chapters of history. Without them, humankind might have remained fragile. Forgotten wanderers, but with them, humans were tested, shaped, and ultimately compelled to become the very beings we recognize today. On humanity's long journey through the Ice Age, perhaps the most fragile, yet most powerful image was that of the children. They knew nothing of the merciless climate, could not defend themselves from predators, nor find food on their own. And yet, they were the very reason their communities pressed forward, the driving force behind enduring blizzards, keeping the fire alive, and sharing the last scraps of meat. These children, the children of the ice, were proof that humankind had not surrendered, that even in the deepest cold, life continued to take root. In the darkness of caves, children curled within hides, eyes half closed, breathing pale wisps of air like smoke. They listened to the wind howl outside, to the crackle of fire, and slowly drifted into sleep. For them, the wolves' howls were not just danger, but familiar sounds of childhood, like lullabies etched into memory. In that frozen world, innocence still existed, but it was always wrapped in a thin mist of fear and uncertainty. Day by day, children learned to step into the harsh rhythm of the community. They began with small tasks, gathering dry wood near the cave, collecting leaves, carrying water from streams. As they grew, they watched their parents chip stone, practiced holding sharp shards, learned to bind sinew to wooden shafts. These lessons were not given through words, but through action, through repetition in every gesture. A child might shatter a stone tool and cut their hand, but instead of scolding, An elder would quietly place another stone in their palm. From generation to generation, these skills were passed on like a flame that never died. Children were also taught to listen to nature. They learned to recognize the winds that heralded a blizzard, to read the tracks of animals pressed into snow, to sense the subtle shifts in the air that meant danger was near. For adults, these were instincts of survival. For children, they were the first lessons of life, where mistakes could cost death. Yet this very harshness sharpened them, turning young eyes into vigilant ones, clumsy steps into careful strides. On nights gathered around the fire, when warmth pushed back the cold, children listened to stories told by the elders, sounds not yet full words, gestures mimicking the hunt, the chase, the moon hanging above the sky. They widened their eyes, imagining wondrous scenes, sometimes smiling, sometimes frightened, sometimes sighing softly. These simple tales planted seeds of faith within their hearts, that even when darkness covered the world, light would always endure. To the community, children were not only responsibility, but also hope. Every newborn was a victory against the cold, a defiance against the ice age itself, declaring that humans had not been defeated. A mother, holding her infant, did more than keep it warm. She held the reason for everyone to go on. Cries echoing in the cave were not only sorrow or burden, but music reminding them that life had not been extinguished. Yet childhood in the Ice Age was perilous. Many never survived their first winter, fragile bodies succumbing to hunger and frost. At times, entire groups faced cruel choices: to keep alive a weak child, or to focus their strength on others so the community might endure. Such moments carved scars deep into memory, shaping unspoken grief. And within that pain, humans learned that life was achingly fragile, yet more precious than anything. Those who survived grew alongside the storms. They became hunters, firekeepers, storytellers. In their eyes, the community saw the future. Every step they took across the snow was a continuation of their ancestors. Every laugh echoing in a cave was a declaration that humankind would not perish. From these children, humanity walked through winters, through centuries of ice to survive into the present day. In a world of snow and howling winds, the children were the hidden flame that kept the community from breaking apart. Every time a child was born, the entire group seemed to gain new strength. A mother pressed her baby close to her chest, shielding it with thick hides, and each faint breath rising like pale smoke in the dark was a reminder that life had not been extinguished. In the eyes of the adults, the child was proof of the community's resilience, a declaration that they lived not only for the present, but to pass life forward into the future. Childhood in the Ice Age was never carefree. Children bore responsibility early, not through heavy labor, but through learning the rules of survival as quickly as possible. From a young age, they followed adults outside, learning to find dry wood beneath snow, to distinguish the tracks of deer or hare, to listen to the forest for signs of danger. Mistakes sometimes left scars, but each scar became a lesson etched deep into memory. A child who grew strong in the blizzards would one day become a steadfast firekeeper for the group. By the fire, children learned something even more vital: memory and story. Elders, with wisdom earned through many winters, told them of long migrations, of times when the group was hunted by saber-toothed cats, of moments of fortune when a mammoth carcass was found frozen in the ice. Crude as the words were, clumsy as the gestures, these tales planted a treasury of knowledge in young minds. They were not only entertainment in the cold night, but survival lessons. warnings that kept the next generation from repeating old mistakes. Through children's eyes, the frozen world was not only danger, but also a stage for imagination. Watching sparks leap across stone walls, they saw beasts, spirits, the moon, and the sun. They laughed while imitating the howl of wolves, shuddered at the wind's ghostly voice, and grew wide-eyed at tales of faraway lands where green grass waited beneath melting ice. Their imagination, rough and unformed, became the seed of faith, belief, and creativity, the roots of what humanity would one day build into culture and art. Children were also the center of sacrifice. In brutal winters, when food ran out, adults often gave up their portions so the young might live. They knew only through the children could the group have a future. At times, adults collapsed from hunger, but the children were still carried to safety, for they were the continuation of bloodlines. Such sacrifice was rarely spoken aloud, but it became an unspoken law. The grown may fall, but the children must be saved. Yet not all survived. Many never lived through their first winter, fragile bodies consumed by frost and hunger. A baby's cry would fall silent in the night, leaving heavy silence within the cave. These losses scarred the hearts of the living, but also hardened them. Out of grief grew determination, to guard the children who remained, to protect the ember of humanity, no matter the cost. Those who endured became living proof of human strength. They walked the snow with steadier steps, gripped stone blades with greater confidence, and faced the shadows with wary but unflinching eyes. Each new generation was another step forward. Each child who grew strong was a reminder that humanity could withstand nature. The children of the ice carried with them the strength, wisdom, and memory of their people, so that one day, when the ice receded, they would lead humanity into the light. And when pale dawn spread across the frozen plain, a child ran stumbling across the snow, leaving behind tiny footprints. The adults watched, smiling faintly. In the howl of the wind, in the weight of the cold, those prints were a declaration that humankind would not be erased. Even if ice covered the world, humanity lived on, in the fragile yet unyielding form of its children. As the ice spread wider and wider, the inhabitants of the Ice Age were never allowed to remain in one place for long. Each land sustained them only briefly before becoming barren, too harsh to endure. And so, humans moved on. Their journey had no clear destination, no maps, no familiar trails, only calloused feet, patience, and the instinct that told them they must keep walking, for to stay still was to die. From the dry grasslands of Africa, humans pressed northward, crossing deserts, valleys, and following frigid rivers. Small groups trudged in silence, their footsteps muffled in the snow, accompanied only by the wind. Along the way, they found new caves, sparse forests, and plains where herds once lingered. Each stop was only a pause, a fleeting rest before hunger and cold drove them on again. These migrations were not merely flights of escape, but quests of search. They sought unfrozen water, wild game, and safe shelter. Some groups moved in opposite directions, sometimes meeting, sometimes parting. Some vanished forever into the storms, never to be heard from again. Others found richer lands, survived longer, and passed their hard-won lessons to the next generation. Step by step, across thousands of years, their footprints traced the first human map, not on paper, but carved into collective memory. On these journeys, humans learned to face impermanence. Each migration meant leaving behind a shelter, a fire pit, sometimes even the graves of loved ones. Children growing up amid these moves understood that home was not a fixed place, but wherever fire burned, wherever the community gathered, wherever arms held them close. This rootless existence forged adaptability, the strength to look at any landscape and discover ways to survive within it. Dangers haunted every march. Cracking ice could swallow an entire group. Frozen rivers could shatter beneath their weight. Predators could strike without warning. At times, those at the rear were sacrificed so the rest could escape. Yet from such pain, they learned courage and solidarity. They held hands crossing ice, shielded children together, shared the last scraps of food. Migration became not only a struggle for survival, but a living testament to the strength of community. At night, groups huddled by their fires. Children slept in their mothers' arms, while the adults whispered. They shared information with simple sounds: herds to the east, storms to the west, caves to the north. Slowly, these rough signs evolved into the first language of coordination. What began as growls, shouts, and chest thumps grew into a means of moving together as one. Migration also brought encounters. At times, two groups stumbled upon the same water source or valley. They looked on each other with suspicion, but then learned to trade. One group had fire, the other meat. One had hides, the other tools. Thus, the earliest exchanges began, sowing the seed of trade. Yet at other times, competition flared into conflict, bare-handed fights, sharp stone points raised in battle for survival. Even in strife, humans learned something vital: that they were not alone, that beyond their own band lay others, enduring the ice as they did. Each step of the endless journey, though harsh, carried them farther, widening their known world, stretching their imagination. They began to believe there were lands beyond, warmer, richer in food, waiting to be found. This belief became their fuel, pushing them onward even when bodies faltered, even when storms threatened to erase them. And so, through generations, the migrations continued, unbroken streams of people flowing like hidden rivers beneath the ice. They did not know where they would arrive, but they knew they must go. For it was the journey itself that sustained them, shaping humans into beings who would never stop moving, creatures destined always to search, always to press forward. The footsteps of early humans upon the thick ice were not merely fleeting marks, but the lines that wrote humanity's enduring story. Each migration, stretching months or even years, carried them into unfamiliar lands, where landscapes shifted, where herds followed rhythms of their own, where challenges changed once again. Migration was not a choice, but a necessity. When hunger gnawed at their bellies, when ice smothered every source of food, only their feet could carry them toward hope. Yet they never walked in complete uncertainty. They watched migrating birds, traced animal tracks, and caught scents in the wind to choose their path. These subtle signs became an invisible map. Those who walked before passed knowledge to those who followed, one generation teaching the next. In this way, the community carried within them a collective memory, a map not inked on paper, but inscribed in their hearts and retold in stories beside the fire. The journey tested not only bodies, but also spirits. There were days they trudged endlessly across blank plains of white, unable to tell earth from sky, the monotony threatening despair. But in that despair, their will burned brightest. They looked at one another, at the children carried in arms, and knew they could not collapse. Sometimes, the fragile presence of a child was the only reason a whole band pressed forward through the boundless miles. Disaster often struck along the way. Some groups were swallowed by deep crevasses, losing members in an instant. Others were swept away by blizzards, leaving only a few survivors wandering in strange lands. Yet some were fortunate, stumbling upon fertile valleys where wild game roamed and streams had not frozen. Whatever the outcome, the lesson was always the same. Nothing lasted forever, and only perseverance and unity could preserve life. Encounters between different bands grew more frequent as migration stretched on. When two groups met, their eyes were sharp with suspicion, hands tightening on stone tools. But slowly, they learned to trade. One side offered hides, the other dried meat. One had fire, the other sharpened tools. These crude exchanges were the first seeds of trade, a small step, but a vital one in humanity's growth. Still, not every meeting ended in peace. Fierce competition sometimes led to clashes. Shouts rang out, spears flew, and blood stained the white snow. Even this strife became part of history, a reminder that from the very beginning, humans both cooperated and contended, shared and fought. Migration also wove collective memory. Elders told children of places they had passed. The glacier that split and swallowed a comrade, the forest where survival came with the discovery of deer, the valley where a bear nearly claimed them, but fire saved the day. These were not mere stories. They were maps of the spirit, warnings for the next generation on how to choose safer paths. Perhaps it was during these endless journeys that humans first realized they belonged to no single place. Their home was not a fixed cave, but anywhere they lit a fire together. Migration etched into their souls the instinct to seek, to explore, to always move forward. Thousands of years later, when the ice had melted, that instinct endured, driving them to climb mountains, cross rivers, and sail oceans in search of new lands. And so, the quiet footprints in the snow became the red thread stretched across history. They told future generations that our ancestors never knew resignation, that even in the harshest age, they chose to walk rather than wait for extinction. Those migrations, though grueling, stand as a resounding testament to the unyielding spirit of humankind, a spirit that never stops, never ceases searching, never lets go of hope. As bands of humans continued their migrations across the frozen plains, as fires flickered in the caves, they began to realize that the world around them was more than a battlefield for survival. The sky, the moon, the sun, the blizzards, the distant thunder, these were forces beyond their understanding. In awe and fear, humanity began to form its first beliefs, vague yet powerful faiths that nourished their spirits through the endless winters. Fire, their closest companion, became the most sacred symbol. They believed it carried a soul, an invisible spirit that needed care. To kindle fire was to summon a deity. To feed it wood was to nurture a living being. The flames did not only warm their bodies, but warmed their faith. Each night, they gathered around it, whispering, chanting crude songs, rituals of hope that the fire would never die. Above, the moon hung over the frozen sky, commanding reverence. It waxed and waned, vanished, and returned, a cycle of mystery. To humans, it was proof of an unseen rhythm, a law beyond their grasp. Perhaps, in their hearts, the moon was the eye of a god, watching over them through the long nights. Children in caves listened as elders mimicked its shape with howls and gestures, teaching them that even in the dark, a light still watched over humankind. Thunder, storms, the wailing winds, all these fierce natural powers sowed awe and dread. They did not know why thunder roared, only that it was the voice of some great force. They did not know why the wind shrieked, only believed spirits swept across the plains. To ease their fear, they began small rituals, scattering ash into the air, clapping, howling, arranging stones in circles around the fire. These acts were their first conversations with the unseen world, their pleas for protection against what they could not name. On cave walls, crude drawings appeared: mammoths, wild horses, deer, bears. These were not merely records, but symbols. They believed that to draw the animal was to secure success in the hunt, that by recreating its form, they could exert a measure of control over fate. Simple as they were, these images marked a great leap of imagination, the first transformation of the outer world into signs and symbols. In cold nights, elders told children of ancestral spirits, the fallen who still lingered, watching their descendants. They believed death was not disappearance, but transformation into wind, into ice, into the glow of the moon. This faith softened the weight of loss, giving them strength to keep moving forward without being crushed by grief. These early beliefs were not built from doctrine, nor bound to temples. They were woven from trembling before nature, the howling wind, which they called the voice of spirits, the fire's glow, which they saw as the breath of a guardian, the drawings on cave walls, which they treated as prayers. Vague as they were, such beliefs became precious medicine for the soul, keeping humans upright against blizzards and darkness. And so, through winters and generations, humanity learned to survive, not only with the strength of their bodies, but with the strength of faith. These first symbols and beliefs were the roots of culture, the beginnings of a spiritual world that would grow alongside humankind's rise. On their endless journey through the long winters, humans gradually realized that physical strength alone could not sustain them. They needed an unseen anchor, an explanation for what lay beyond their grasp, a faith to hold against the terror of darkness. And so, primitive symbols multiplied, weaving the first spiritual net that sheltered communities in the ice. Each time the fire flared brightly, it was seen as a blessing, a sign of protection. When the flames weakened or died, panic spread. The firekeeper became a figure of reverence, not only for their practical duty, but because they were thought to commune with the soul of light itself. Before great hunts, groups often gathered around the fire, hands pressed to their chests, heads bowed. It was no formal ritual, but their way of asking fire to grant them strength and luck. On cave walls, more figures appeared, herds encircled, humans raising spears, abstract marks, circles, zigzags, dots. These were more than depictions. They were offerings. Early humans believed that to draw an animal was to grasp its soul, to tilt fate in their favor. In the flicker of firelight, shadows made the images seem to move, convincing them that a mysterious force resided within the stone itself. Even death was shrouded in belief. When one fell to hunger, cold, or beasts, the body was not abandoned. It was placed in a cave, covered with hides, sometimes sprinkled with earth or ash. This was the seed of conscious burial, born of the belief that the dead lived on in another form. They whispered to the body as though speaking to the spirit that lingered. From this grew the first notion of ancestors, of continuity that bound people to both past and future. During snowstorms, when winds howled like lamentations, communities huddled by fire and created strange rhythms. They clapped, struck stones, howled in unison. At first, These sounds were merely to drive away fear, but slowly they became communal rites. Children mimicked their elders, voices merging, and the first music was born. It was not meaningless noise, but a thread binding souls together, reminding them that they were not alone in the storm. Over time, such beliefs became treasures. Thanks to them, humans could keep walking even when all seemed lost. A fading ember could revive hope. A crude circle scratched on a wall could inspire confidence that tomorrow's hunt would succeed. A collective howl in the night could transform fear into strength. Fragile though they were, these symbols proved stronger than any hide, for they wrapped around the human spirit and kept it from dissolving into darkness. Belief and symbol were humanity's first steps toward meaning. Before they built villages, before they planted seeds, they worshipped fire, etched figures, and honored ancestral spirits. These were the invisible threads binding them to nature, to each other, and to generations yet unborn. And so, in the age of ice, when snow and frost seemed to smother every hope, humans created a world within their minds. A world where fire had a soul, where the moon kept watch, where drawings carried power, and where ancestors lingered to guard their kin. This inner world was the seed of culture, belief, and spirit, a fire that would never go out, burning alongside the real flames in their frozen caves. The Ice Age was not only a grand tableau of snow-capped mountains, towering mammoth herds, and fire-lit caves. It was also a relentless stretch of days filled with merciless hardship. There were times when darkness seemed to swallow every shred of hope, when entire communities sank into heavy silence, breathing faintly, eyes hollow, staring into the void. Yet it was in these darkest hours that humanity proved once more they would not yield so easily. Winters sometimes dragged on for years, the pale sun too weak to pierce the shroud of frost that blanketed the sky. Food grew so scarce that a meal might be only a handful of tough roots, a scrap of dried meat, or at times nothing more than melted snow. Adults grew gaunt, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow from hunger. Children wrapped in hides often slipped into sleep never to awaken again. The cries faded, replaced by dreadful silence, a silence that made humans feel abandoned by the world itself. And yet, even in despair, sparks of compassion endured. An elder gave up their small portion of meat to a child, sometimes their last meal. A mother clenched her teeth through hunger so her child could eat, if only for a moment. A hunter returned empty-handed, but still told a cheerful story to lift spirits. These gestures, small as they seemed, were flickers of light in the frozen night, lights that tethered people to life. There were days when storms raged, winds howled, and snow buried cave mouths, sealing the exits. Communities huddled together, the small fire trembling, its weak glow like a dying breath. They knew that if the fire went out, the cold would flood in and life would vanish. In those hours, trembling hands fed in twigs and scraps of wood, holding on stubbornly. Each crackling spark was like a heartbeat, a reminder that they were still here, not yet consumed by ice. But darkness did not come from nature alone. It also rose within. Desperation sometimes made people turn on one another, when even a morsel of food became a cause for conflict. Shouts echoed in caves, sometimes ending in injury or death. These were tragic moments when survival twisted community into enemies. Yet after such eruptions, they looked at one another with sorrow. Deep down, they knew only unity kept them alive, and division meant doom. This lesson, repeated over and over, forged the human instinct to place the group above the self. Strangely, even in the blackest nights, humans still found reasons to hope. A glimpse of clear sky, a shaft of golden sunlight on the ice, a fresh track in the snow. All were promises. They cheered at the sight of distant deer, shouted with joy at the discovery of an unfrozen river. Brief as these moments were, they rekindled courage, pushing people to rise, to grip their spears, to set out once more. Hope also lived in the children, their giggles, their eyes lighting up at the fire. Their tiny footsteps across the snow were healing magic. In them, adults saw the future, the reason to keep moving forward. Children did not yet understand the full cruelty of their world, but their innocence itself reignited the spirit of the whole group. In the darkest hours, when cold and shadow pressed down, humans leaned on one another, on fragile faith, and on memory. They remembered times when hunger was endured, when hunts were won, when ancestors' stories gave them strength. Memory became a wall against despair, proof that survival was possible, that light would return. And indeed, no matter how long winter lasted, it eventually yielded to fleeting warmth. When the snow melted, when patches of earth emerged, when birdsong returned, humanity erupted with joy. They gathered the first green shoots, drank from streams freed of ice, filled their lungs with air less bitterly cold. In that moment, hope was no longer distant. It was real, the reward for a community's unyielding endurance. Winter followed winter. As blizzards seemed without end, humankind stood many times on the brink of extinction. In the frozen darkness, hope often dwindled to the size of a flickering candle about to die. Yet it was at this very edge that the will to survive flared brighter than ever before. There were days when the group had to cut the last scraps of dried meat into tiny pieces, dividing them equally, even giving a share to the smallest child. No one was left behind, for they understood survival depended not only on strength, but on community. A morsel might not fill an empty stomach, but it could feed belief, and that belief kept the group from collapsing. On nights when the wind howled like a scream, when only glowing embers remained, people found ways to sustain their spirits. They sang simple tunes, their voices echoing in caves like lullabies, soothing fear. They etched new shapes on the walls, carving deeper lines of the beasts, as if calling them forth to ensure tomorrow's hunt would succeed. These acts did not calm storms or banish hunger, but they warmed the soul just enough to outlast the darkness. There were moments of sorrow when someone fell and never rose again. Yet instead of leaving the body behind, the community gathered, laid hides over it, whispered short sounds like farewells. They believed the soul would travel with the wind, become the glow of the moon, or a flame guiding the living. Faith in life beyond death kept them from being crushed by grief, transforming loss into the strength to move forward. Amid the heavy weight of endless dark, even the smallest moments could turn everything. A great beast fell after a relentless hunt, feeding the group for days. A frozen stream cracked open, offering fresh water after long thirst. One morning, the sun blazed through thick mist, its golden rays sparkling on the ice like 1,000 gems. Each sign was a promise that life endured, that the ice would not last forever. The children remained the seeds of hope. They played in the snow, laughed when the fire roared, listened wide-eyed to the elders' tales. Their laughter echoed through the caves, drowning out the wind, silencing fear. Adults looked at them and found reason to fight on, for in a child's eyes, the world was still full of wonders, still rich with tomorrows worth reaching for. Darkness and hope always walked together, like two sides of a coin. At the depths of despair, humans found strength in one another, in memory, in the first symbols of belief. And because of this, they were not erased by the ice, but became stronger, more resilient. When winter finally loosened its grip, when patches of green pushed through the earth, humans stepped out of caves and lifted their faces to the sun. That pale light, after months swallowed by darkness, shone like a miracle. They drew deep breaths, feeling warmth seep into their flesh, and knew they had survived another trial. In their hearts, faith took root. No matter how many storms returned, no matter how thick the darkness grew, the light would always come back. Hope would never die. The first hints of warmth arrived softly, like a long sigh released by the earth after centuries of holding ice in its chest. The wind no longer cut into flesh like a blade. The sun rose a little higher above the gray sky, and snow began to retreat from the crags it had clung to for so long. From brown streaks breaking through the white steppe, tender grass emerged, thin as silk, quivering at first in the wind, then greening, then spreading across the newly uncovered soil. Rivers that seemed imprisoned forever began to stir, their cracking ice resounding like great drums announcing a new season. Dark water rushed through the fissures, carrying the scent of warm mud and rotting wood. Humans stepped out of their caves and stood in silence, as though fearing that even the slightest movement might awaken the long winter once more. They saw signs of change everywhere. Herds altered their paths, deer tiptoed along fresh slopes of grass, wild horses no longer dug through snow for roots but grazed easily on green shoots. In thawed waters, flashes of fish broke the surface and vanished, leaving ripples that spread wide. Children shed a layer of hides, scampering on damp soil, their bare feet touching grass without the sting of frost. In the hearts of adults, a cautious joy stirred, like a dream, like a forbidden wish. For generations, they had trained themselves not to trust good change, lest it betray them when storms returned. Warming gave them the chance to live differently. On riverbanks, they drove stakes across the flow, funneling fish into shallow pools where quick hands could seize them. Hooks of polished bone, barbed points lashed to wood, became new weapons, supple enough not to snap in water, sharp enough to hold prey. They wove nets from sinew and plant fiber, built low stone dams to raise water briefly before it drained, leaving fish stranded. Fires now smelled different. The smoke of dried fish, the tang of hides stretched and cured, a new flavor of survival, no longer tied solely to great hunts. At the same time, they built sturdier shelters. On soil, no longer frozen year-round, posts could be driven deep, mammoth bones arched into frames, hide stitched thick and tight across. Smoke holes opened at the top. Slender bone needles threaded with sinew pulled taut seams stronger than hurried stitches against the wind. Inside, wood was stacked neatly, meat hung high. Willow branch baskets held small treasures, safe from loss. Around the huts, low fences of stakes marked boundaries, not against storms, but as the first outlines of home, where children played within sight of watchful eyes. As warm days joined into seasons, endless wandering gave way to settled camps. Meadows by streams became familiar, places with racks for hides, with leaning trees for smokehouses. They still followed herds, but their circuits became predictable, their memory of paths a woven net of places each tied to a story, a fallen hunter, a rescue. Groups met more often at seasonal crossings, trading quietly. Red ochre ground from upstream rock for sharpened blades of black stone, shells from receding shores for barbed spears. From such exchanges came promises, then marriages, then children with the eyes of both riverbanks. Within warmer homes and gentler nights, words blossomed. Language shifted from grunts of command to softer sounds of naming and remembering. Children were called by new syllables. Cliffs were named with sounds combining water and grass. The fish run gained a distinct name everyone understood. Elders now told not only of storms survived, but of grass sprouting, of birds nesting on cliffs, of winds that foretold flowers or cold rains. They marked the year not with numbers, but with natural cycles, feeling for the first time that time itself had rhythm, had a circle, a going and returning. Even funerals changed. The dead were no longer always laid in stone crevices, but sometimes buried in soft soil, covered with earth, given objects to carry. A dog's tooth strung on sinew, a bone needle, a sprinkle of red ochre. No words defined the meaning, but in the gentle hands and lowered gazes was a promise that the path now led not only into ice, but into grass, into water, into seasons the dead might still walk in another form. Dogs lingered at graves, reluctant to leave, then were called back to curl at human feet by night, their wagging tails carrying the long story of a companionship that was no longer uncertain. Hunting, too, transformed. Giant beasts grew scarcer, no longer enough to sustain months of life. Hunters turned to smaller game. Snares tightened around hares, hidden pits trapped young boars, slings struck birds from low branches. Skills grew more subtle, eyes reading faint changes in grass, ears catching unnatural rustles, hands crafting barbs delicate enough to pierce without tearing meat. They learned to walk lighter, to wait longer, to answer nature with precision instead of sheer daring. Warming brought things unseen before. At camp edges, patches of grain dropped seed, growing thicker the next year where hearth ashes lay. On hillsides where roots had been pounded for flour, familiar plants sprouted again in neat rows. Women gathered ripe seeds and scattered them nearby. Next season, shoots appeared, so they cleared stones to give them room. They did not call it sowing, only helping plants live closer to fire. So food lay near at hand. Yet in those small acts, a new habit was born, a thin thread binding people to land with patience instead of flight. Sometimes, tubers were left in damp soil from weary hands. Next season, green shoots sprang thick, and they laughed at the warm gift of chance. They began shielding sprouts with branches, circling them with stones, watering them at dawn and dusk through dry weeks. Amid river song and wind, nameless gardens arose, small as a hut's front yard, yet enough so mothers no longer carried children half a day to gather roots. These green shoots were not painted on cave walls, yet they shaped every meal, quietly taking root in memory as new work for human hands. On the earth's surface, human footprints thickened with new meaning. Trails linked huts to streams, drying racks to smokehouses, forming paths of habit in familiar spaces. Children made playgrounds of stones and circles. Sticks with strings became tugging games. Elders had rocks of their own to sit upon, listening to the shift of wind. Hunters had corners where stone dust piled from sharpening tools. Community now was not just a band of travelers, but the faint outline of a place that could hold people still. Even fire's art changed with warmth. They heated stones, dropped them into pits of water to cook foods unsuited to open flame. They discovered clay by the river that, dried and fired near heat, hardened to hold water longer than skin pouches. Hands smoothed rims, pressed marks for grip, set bowls just close enough to fire to keep them from cracking. Through trial, error, and memory of shattered vessels, crude pots were born. Quiet revolutions that opened new ways to store and cook. Dogs no longer only guarded at night, but joined the hunt by day, some flushing rabbits from grass, others staying with children, while adults cast nets. At night, they howled with the wind, yet wagged their tails when fire flared, as though knowing the rhythm of home differed from that of caves. In mornings, a pup dropped a bone at an elder's feet, was stroked, fed a scrap of fat, and heard whispered words, nameless but full of meaning. Such repeated gestures wove a visible bond, a rope of warmth to hold through seasons of sun and seasons when cold returned. Through all this change, old fears remained. Storms still struck at season's end. Ice still crashed from mountains and torrents. Nights still burned cold if fire died. No one forgot how to wrap hides for sleep, to store dried food high, to guide children through fog. The path out of the ice was not a door flung wide, but a long corridor of thresholds, each demanding new habits, more patience, a little more courage to keep the new without losing the old that had carried them through the dark. And so, when warm years outnumbered cold, when grass spread wide and forest reclaimed the void, a thought glowed clear in the human mind, bright as fire at the hearth, that they might stay longer, might call a place home without fearing it would vanish with the season. The thought did not strike like thunder, but seeped like water through stone into stories, into footsteps, into the act of placing another stake, raising another wall, sprinkling seeds around a hut. From then on, the way out was no longer escape from ice, but a step into a world of 4 seasons, of small gardens, of streams with banks, of evenings when fireside tales spoke more of tomorrow and less of yesterday's fear. As the world slowly loosened itself from the grip of ice, humans realized they were no longer desperate wanderers. They had stepped out of the shadows, carrying with them memories and hard-earned knowledge forged over thousands of years. Every step they took onto warmer ground was more than a footprint. It was proof that humanity had endured and triumphed over the harshest trial in its history. In the newly opened green valleys, people began to build camps that lasted across many seasons, not just a fleeting one. Fire was no longer a fragile treasure guarded ember by ember, but a constant glow at the heart of every community. Elders had their own place beside the hearth, recounting winters that felt like nightmares. Children no longer grew up only with the howl of the wind, but also with the chirping of birds and the scent of damp soil after rain. The change was slow but profound, as if humankind had turned onto an entirely new path. They began to mark time not only by the cycle of the moon, but by the return of plants and the nesting of birds. Each year, the same ground sprouted green, the same stretch of river swelled with water. From this, human imagination no longer stopped at fear of nature, but expanded into faith that nature had rhythm, a cycle they could rely on. In that awareness, the first seeds of agriculture and settlement were sown. With patience, scattering seeds, building shelters, taming animals, humans gradually broke free from the harsh loop of mere hunting. The packs of dogs, once only companions, became true friends, sharing meals, guarding the night, joining hunts at dawn. This bond reflected a deeper change. Humans no longer only struggled against nature, but learned to befriend it, to cooperate in order to survive together. In the shadows of memory, They did not forget the long winters, the nights when fires almost died, the children who never woke again. But instead of letting those scars bind them, they turned them into lessons, stories handed to the next generation. Elders sat with their grandchildren, telling of blizzards past, while reminding them always to store food, always to keep the fire alive, always to stay together. That remembrance tightened the bonds of community so that past tragedies were not in vain, but became the foundation of new strength. And then, one dawn, as the sun rose high in a clear sky, people stood atop a hill, gazing down at a valley carpeted in grass, with a river rushing through it. In that moment, they knew they had passed through the door of ice. They were no longer merely survivors. They had become creators. The way out of the ice was not just the warming of climate, but the maturing of spirit, of intellect, and of unity. The small footprints pressed into soft earth, no longer sinking deep into snow, marked the opening of a new road. That road led humanity out of its darkest age and into an era of light, of memory, of faith. And from then on, they carried forever within their hearts the flame that had burned bright in the ice, the flame of life that would never yield. The journey through the Ice Age was the longest, harshest, yet also the most magnificent chapter humanity has ever endured. From the first days, huddling in dark caves, trembling before the night and wild beasts, to the steadfast steps across glaciers and frozen plains, our ancestors faced countless trials that seemed insurmountable. Yet within this very crucible, humankind learned to strike stone into tools, to keep and revere fire, to rely on one another to survive, and to pass down memory while sowing the seeds of belief. The Ice Age was not merely a climate epic. It was a vast forge that shaped the essence of humanity. It taught us fear, but also taught us hope. It forced us to taste hunger, cold, and death. Yet through it, we discovered the value of life, of compassion, and of connection. From the long nights around the fire, from the crude drawings on cave walls, from the cries and laughter of children, humans began the journey toward becoming a species of culture, memory, and imagination. When the ice melted, when the earth turned green again, when rivers and streams flowed once more, humanity stepped out of the shadows forever changed. They carried with them the legacy of thousands of winters, the legacy of resilience and of intellect. They built sturdier shelters, began to sow seeds, to tame animals, and most importantly, to call a place home. It was the first step into a new chapter of human history, the age of villages, of greater communities, of the earliest civilizations. And yet, no matter how far they went, within every person remained the memory of the frozen days. The flickering fire in the cave still burned within their hearts, a reminder that they had once faced impenetrable darkness and endured. The tiny footprints of children in the snow still lived in collective memory, a reminder that humankind always moved forward, even along perilous paths. And the howling winds of the blizzard, though now only an echo of imagination, remained a reminder that hope is most precious when lit in the darkest of times. The children of the ice, our ancient ancestors, passed down not only life itself, but a lesson that humankind is a species born to rise after the storm, to walk through darkness, yet never forget to seek the light. Because of them, we are here today. And in every fire we kindle, in every story we tell, in every step we take toward the future, we can still hear the whisper from the Ice Age. Live, hope, and never yield.